The veterinarian's reaction to seeing this mare's birth will leave you shocked. The sun rose lazily over the rolling hills of Charleston, casting a golden glow across the lush green pastures of Williams' farm. Sarah Williams, a woman in her early 50s with salt and pepper hair and kind eyes that crinkled at the corners, stood on her porch, sipping her morning coffee. Her gaze wandered over her beloved property, a 200-acre haven that had been in her family for generations. As Sarah's eyes swept across the landscape, they settled on the far paddock where her prized mare, Star, grazed peacefully. The horse's coat gleamed in the early morning light, a testament to Sarah's meticulous care. But something about Star's behavior caught Sarah's attention. The mare seemed different. Setting down her coffee mug, Sarah descended the porch steps and made her way across the dewy grass towards the paddock. As she approached, Star lifted her head. Ears pricked forward in recognition of her owner. "Good morning, beautiful," Sarah cooed, reaching out to stroke Star's velvety muzzle. The horse nickered softly in response, but there was an unfamiliar restlessness in her dark eyes. Sarah's brow furrowed as she took a step back, assessing her mare with a critical eye. Star's belly seemed slightly distended, and there was a certain heaviness to her movements that Sarah had never noticed before. A thought struck her, so absurd that she almost laughed out loud. "No, it can't be," she muttered to herself, shaking her head. "You haven't even been near a stallion, girl." But as Sarah watched Star move about the paddock, the nagging suspicion grew stronger. The signs were all there, the slight swelling of the abdomen, the increased appetite, the restlessness. It was as if Star was pregnant. "Impossible," Sarah whispered, her mind racing. She prided herself on running a tight ship, and there was no way Star could have been exposed to a stallion without her knowledge. Yet the evidence before her eyes was undeniable. With trembling fingers, Sarah pulled out her cell phone and dialed a familiar number. After 3 rings, a gruff voice answered. "Dr. Harris, it's Sarah Williams. I need you to come out to the farm as soon as possible. It's about Star. I think she might be pregnant." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When Dr. Harris finally spoke, his voice was laced with confusion and a hint of something else. Was it concern? Pregnant? But that's... Sarah, are you sure? "No, I'm not sure. That's why I need you here. How soon can you come?" Dr. Harris cleared his throat. "I'll be there within the hour." As Sarah ended the call, she couldn't shake the feeling that something extraordinary was unfolding. Little did she know, this mysterious pregnancy was about to turn her peaceful world upside down, setting in motion a chain of events that would uncover long-buried secrets and challenge everything she thought she knew about her quiet life in Charleston. With one last troubled glance at Star, Sarah turned and walked back to the house. She had a feeling she'd need another cup of coffee, or perhaps something stronger, to face whatever the day was about to bring. The gravel driveway crunched under the tires of Dr. Harris's truck as it pulled up to the Williams farmhouse. Sarah, who had been pacing on the porch, rushed down to meet him. Dr. Mark Harris, a man in his early 60s with a weathered face and salt and pepper beard, climbed out of his vehicle, his medical bag in hand. "Sarah," he nodded. His blue eyes clouded with concern. "Let's take a look at Star, shall we?" As they walked towards the paddock, Sarah filled Dr. Harris in on her observations. The veterinarian listened intently, his brow furrowing deeper with each detail. Upon reaching Star, Dr. Harris began his examination. His hands moved with practiced efficiency, but Sarah couldn't help noticing a slight tremor in his fingers. After what seemed like an eternity, he straightened up, his face unreadable. "Well?" Sarah prompted, anxiety evident in her voice. Dr. Harris hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "Sarah, I don't know how to explain this, but you're right. Star shows all the signs of being in the early stages of pregnancy." Sarah's eyes widened. "But that's impossible. She hasn't been anywhere near a stallion. How could this happen?" The veterinarian shook his head, a flicker of something, guilt, fear, passing across his face. "I can't explain it, Sarah. In all my years, I've never seen anything like this. We'll need to run some tests to be sure, but..." He trailed off, his gaze distant. "Mark," Sarah said firmly, using his first name to underscore the seriousness of the situation. "What aren't you telling me?" Dr. Harris sighed heavily. "It's probably nothing, just an old man's paranoia, but it reminds me of something I heard about years ago. A project that was never supposed to see the light of day." Before Sarah could press him further, the sound of approaching hoofbeats interrupted their conversation. They turned to see Thomas Anderson, Sarah's neighbor, riding up on his majestic black stallion, Rocky. "Good morning, Sarah," Thomas called out cheerfully, tipping his cowboy hat. His smile faltered as he noticed the serious expressions on Sarah and Dr. Harris's faces. "Hair's everything all right?" Sarah opened her mouth to respond, but Dr. Harris cut in quickly. "Everything's fine, Thomas. Just a routine checkup on Star here." Thomas nodded, though his eyes narrowed slightly at the obvious tension. "Well, I won't keep you then. Sarah, don't forget about the town meeting tonight. They're discussing the new development project." As Thomas rode away, Sarah turned back to Dr. Harris, determined to get answers. But the veterinarian was already packing up his equipment. "I'll rush those tests for you, Sarah," he said, avoiding her gaze. "In the meantime, keep a close eye on Star. Call me immediately if anything changes." As Dr. Harris drove away, leaving a cloud of dust in his wake, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that she was standing on the edge of a mystery far deeper than a seemingly impossible pregnancy. She glanced at Star, who gazed back with those soulful eyes, as if the mare herself held secrets she couldn't share. With a determined set to her jaw, Sarah marched back to the house. It was time to do some investigating of her own. Little did she know, the answers she sought would shake the foundations of her quiet life and expose a web of secrets that had been carefully hidden for years. As the afternoon sun beat down on the Williams farm, Sarah sat at her kitchen table, laptop open before her. Her fingers flew across the keyboard as she delved into research about mysterious animal pregnancies. Hours passed, filled with fruitless searches and dead ends, until a stray thought made her pause. "The security cameras," she murmured, sitting up straight. Sarah had installed a state-of-the-art security system just last year, with cameras covering every inch of the property, including Star's paddock. If anything unusual had happened, it would be on tape. With renewed energy, she navigated to the security footage from the past few months. As she scrolled through countless hours of mundane farm life, her eyes began to glaze over. Just as she was about to give up, a flicker of movement caught her attention. Sarah leaned in closer, squinting at the screen. The timestamp read 2:17 a.m., nearly 2 months ago. A shadowy figure was moving near Star's paddock. Sarah's heart raced as she watched the figure deftly open the gate, then disappear off-screen. "What on earth?" she whispered, clicking to the next camera's feed. But as the video should have switched to show the interior of the paddock, the screen went black. Sarah frowned, clicking back and forth. The footage resumed nearly an hour later, showing nothing but Star peacefully grazing. Sarah sat back, her mind whirling. Someone had been on her property, had opened Star's paddock, and then a significant chunk of footage was missing. This was no coincidence. A knock at the door made her jump. Sarah closed her laptop and went to answer, finding Thomas Anderson's daughter, Sarah, standing on her porch. The girl, barely out of her teens, looked nervous, fidgeting with the hem of her shirt. "Sarah, honey, what brings you here?" Mrs. Williams asked, noting the young woman's agitation. "Mrs. Williams, I need to talk to you," Sarah said, her voice trembling. "It's about Star." Surprised, Mrs. Williams ushered the girl inside. They sat at the kitchen table, and Sarah took a deep breath before speaking. "I did something terrible," she confessed, tears welling in her eyes. I let Rocky into Star's paddock that night." Mrs. Williams felt as if the air had been sucked from her lungs. "You what? Why would you do that?" Sarah's words tumbled out in a rush. "I overheard my dad talking on the phone about Rocky. He said Rocky was special. That he'd been part of some experiment. I thought if I could get a foal from him, it would be valuable. I never meant any harm, I swear." As Sarah dissolved into tears, Mrs. Williams sat in stunned silence. The missing piece of the puzzle had fallen into place, but it only raised more questions. What experiment? Why was Thomas keeping it a secret? Sarah, Mrs. Williams said gently. I need you to tell me everything you know about this experiment. As the young woman began to speak, Mrs. Williams realized that the mystery surrounding Star's pregnancy was far from solved. In fact, it was only the tip of an iceberg that threatened to upturn the peaceful life she had always known. Outside, the wind picked up, rustling through the trees as if nature itself was whispering secrets. In her paddock, Star lifted her head, her ears twitching as if listening to a distant call that only she could hear. The stage was set for revelations that would shake the foundations of Charleston and beyond. The town hall meeting that evening was abuzz with chatter, but Sarah Williams heard none of it. Her mind was consumed by the revelations of the day, the security footage, young Sarah's confession, and the hints of a mysterious experiment involving Rocky. As the mayor droned on about zoning regulations, Sarah's eyes drifted to Thomas Anderson, sitting a few rows ahead. What secrets was he hiding behind that affable facade? As the meeting concluded, Sarah made her way through the dispersing crowd towards Thomas. He greeted her with his usual warm smile, but she noticed a flicker of unease in his eyes. Thomas, we need to talk, Sarah said, her voice low but firm. His smile faltered. Of course, Sarah. What about? Not here, she replied, glancing around at the lingering townsfolk. Come by the farm tomorrow morning, early. Thomas nodded, a mixture of resignation and apprehension crossing his face. As Sarah turned to leave, she nearly collided with Dr. Harris, who had materialized beside her. Sarah, he said urgently, I've got the test results. We need to discuss them privately. The drive back to the farm was tense, with Dr. Harris refusing to divulge any information until they were safely inside Sarah's kitchen. As they sat down, the veterinarian pulled out a folder, his hands shaking slightly. Sarah, what I'm about to tell you, it defies everything I know about biology, he began, his voice grave. Star's pregnancy is not just unusual, it's unprecedented. He spread out several documents on the table, charts, graphs, and complex scientific notations that meant little to Sarah. But one word, circled in red, caught her eye. Chimera. What does this mean, Mark? Sarah asked, her throat dry. Dr. Harris took a deep breath. It means that the foal Star is carrying, it's not entirely equine. There are genetic markers that I've never seen before in any horse, or any animal for that matter. Sarah felt the room spin. Are you saying... What are you saying? I'm saying that whatever experiment Rocky was part of, it's changed him on a fundamental level, and now that change is being passed on to his offspring. Dr. Harris paused, his next words barely above a whisper. Sarah, I think we're dealing with genetic engineering far beyond anything that should be possible. As the implications of his words sank in, a memory stirred in Sarah's mind, a conversation overheard years ago between her late husband and Thomas, something about a top-secret government project. At the time, she'd dismissed it as the fanciful talk of two old friends. Now she wasn't so sure. Mark, she said slowly, what do you know about this experiment? You hinted at something earlier. The veterinarian's face paled. It was a long time ago. I was young, ambitious. They approached me to be part of a revolutionary project, creating the perfect warhorse, stronger, faster, more intelligent than any animal on Earth. I refused. But I heard rumors. I never thought they'd actually succeed. A heavy silence fell over the kitchen. Outside, a storm was brewing, the wind howling around the old farmhouse like a warning. What do we do now? Sarah asked, her voice barely audible over the rising gale. Dr. Harris met her gaze, his eyes filled with a mixture of fear and determination. We need to protect Star and her foal. If anyone finds out about this, they'll take them away. And we need to find out just how deep this conspiracy goes. As if in response to his words, a loud crash echoed from outside. Sarah rushed to the window to see a large branch had fallen, narrowly missing Star's paddock. The mare was agitated, pacing back and forth, her movements more erratic than usual. It's starting, Dr. Harris said ominously. Whatever's growing inside Star, it's already affecting her. We're running out of time. Sarah turned from the window, her jaw set with resolve. Then we'd better get to work. Thomas has some explaining to do, and I intend to get answers." As the storm raged outside, mirroring the turmoil of secrets and lies being unraveled, Sarah Williams prepared for a confrontation that would change her life forever. Little did she know, forces beyond her imagination were already converging on her quiet farm, drawn by the promise of a miracle or a monstrosity, growing in the womb of a simple mare. Dawn broke over Charleston, the aftermath of the night storm evident in scattered branches and waterlogged fields. Sarah Williams stood on her porch, clutching a mug of coffee, her eyes fixed on the horizon where Thomas Anderson's truck would soon appear. As if on cue, the rumble of an engine cut through the morning stillness. Sarah straightened her shoulders, steeling herself for the confrontation to come. Thomas's truck pulled up, and he stepped out, his usual confident demeanor replaced by a wary hesitance. "Morning, Sarah," he called, approaching the porch. "Thomas," she replied coolly. "Let's talk inside." Once in the kitchen, an uncomfortable silence stretched between them. Sarah was the first to break it. "I know about Rocky," she said bluntly. "I know about the experiment." Thomas's face drained of color. "Sarah, I can explain." "Can you?" She cut him off. Can you explain why you're hiding a genetically engineered horse? Why my mare is now carrying what could be a dangerous, unprecedented hybrid?" Thomas slumped into a chair, suddenly looking every bit his age. "It wasn't supposed to be like this," he muttered. "It was supposed to be contained, controlled." "Start from the beginning," Sarah demanded, sitting across from him. Thomas took a deep breath. "It started about 10 years ago. The military approached me. They knew about my background in biotechnology, my work with equine genetics. They had this idea: create the perfect warhorse, stronger, faster, more intelligent than anything nature could produce. Sarah listened, her coffee growing cold and forgotten, as Thomas spun a tale of secret laboratories, groundbreaking experiments, and ethical lines crossed in the name of progress. Rocky was the culmination of years of work, Thomas continued. But he was also the reason I walked away. He was too perfect, Sarah. Too intelligent. It scared me, what we'd created. So you stole him, Sarah concluded. Thomas nodded. I couldn't let them weaponize him. I thought if I kept him here, let him live a normal life, it would be okay. But it's not okay, is it? Sarah's voice was hard. Your daughter found out, played matchmaker, and now we have a potentially dangerous foal on the way. Before Thomas could respond, the kitchen door burst open. Dr. Harris rushed in, out of breath and wild-eyed. Sarah, Thomas, you need to come quickly. It's Star. Something's wrong. The three of them raced to the paddock. Star was on the ground, her sides heaving, eyes rolling in distress. It's too early, Sarah cried. She can't be in labor already. Dr. Harris knelt beside the mare, his experienced hands moving swiftly. This isn't normal labor, he announced grimly. The foal, it's growing too fast. It's putting enormous strain on Star's system. Thomas stepped forward, his face ashen. It's my fault. The genetic modifications, they must be accelerating the foal's development. As they watched, helpless, Star let out a piercing whinny. The ground beneath them seemed to tremble, and a strange, pulsing light emanated from the mare's swollen belly. What in God's name? Dr. Harris whispered. Suddenly, the air was filled with the thrum of helicopter blades. 3 black choppers appeared on the horizon, bearing down on the farm with ominous purpose. They've found us, Thomas said, his voice hollow with dread. Sarah looked from the approaching helicopters to her beloved mare, her world crumbling around her. In that moment, she made a decision that would alter the course of everything to come. We need to hide Star, she said, her voice ringing with determination. Whatever's happening here, we can't let them take her or the foal. As the helicopters drew closer, Sarah, Thomas, and Dr. Harris began the desperate task of moving the distressed mare. The wind whipped around them, carrying with it the promise of a storm far greater than any they had weathered before. In the chaos of the moment, none of them noticed the shimmer of something otherworldly rippling across Star's coat, or the brief flash of inhuman intelligence in her pain-filled eyes. The true nature of what they were dealing with was about to reveal itself, and nothing would ever be the same again. The rhythmic thud of helicopter blades grew deafening as Sarah, Thomas, and Dr. Harris struggled to move the distressed Star. They managed to guide her into an old, disused barn at the far end of the property, its weathered walls offering a flimsy shield against the approaching threat. "We need to barricade the doors," Sarah shouted over the noise, her mind racing. As they worked to secure their makeshift fortress, Star's cries of distress intensified. Suddenly, a blinding light flooded the barn as the door burst open. Silhouetted against the glare stood a figure in a crisp military uniform, flanked by armed soldiers. "Now step away from the horse," the figure commanded, his voice cold and authoritative. Thomas stepped forward, placing himself between the newcomers and Star. "Colonel Blackwood," he said, his voice tinged with a mix of recognition and disdain. "I should have known you'd be behind this." The colonel's lips curved into a humorless smile. "Dr. Anderson, did you really think you could hide our greatest achievement forever?" As the tension in the barn reached a fever pitch, Star let out an otherworldly whinny. The air around her shimmered, and before their astonished eyes, her form began to change. Her coat took on a metallic sheen, muscles rippling with unnatural strength beneath. "My God," Dr. Harris whispered. "What have we done?" Colonel Blackwood's eyes gleamed with triumph. "What we've done, Doctor, is create the future, a perfect fusion of biological and technological advancement." But his victory was short-lived. With a surge of impossible strength, Star broke free from her restraints. The transformed mare reared up, her hooves gleaming like polished steel. In that moment, it became clear that whatever Star had become, she was no one's weapon to control. The soldiers raised their weapons, but Sarah threw herself in front of Star. "No! You can't hurt her." As chaos erupted in the barn, a new sound cut through the cacophony, the unmistakable whinny of a newborn foal. All eyes turned to see a small, shimmering form struggling to its feet beside Star. The foal was unlike anything they had ever seen. Its coat seemed to shift colors in the light, and its eyes held an intelligence that was decidedly unhorse-like. Star moved protectively in front of her offspring, facing down the humans with a defiant stance. Colonel Blackwood stepped forward, his face a mask of awe and ambition. "This changes everything. With this technology, we could revolutionize warfare, medicine, everything." But as he reached out towards the foal, something extraordinary happened. The newborn creature locked eyes with Sarah, and in that moment, she felt a presence in her mind, alien, yet somehow familiar. "They're sentient," Sarah gasped, understanding flooding through her. "They're not just animals anymore. They're something more." The revelation hung in the air, heavy with implications. Dr. Harris and Thomas exchanged shocked glances, the full weight of their actions finally sinking in. Colonel Blackwood, however, remained unmoved. Sentient or not, they belonged to the government. "Men, secure the specimens." As the soldiers moved to comply, Star and her foal began to glow with an intense light. The humans shielded their eyes, and when they looked again, the barn was empty save for themselves. "Where did they go?" Colonel Blackwood demanded, his composure finally cracking. Sarah, Thomas, and Dr. Harris stood in stunned silence, realizing that the situation had escalated far beyond their control. Whatever Star and her foal had become, they were now free, their destination and intentions unknown. As the colonel barked orders and his men scrambled to search the property, Sarah caught Thomas's eye. A silent understanding passed between them. This was only the beginning of a much larger story, one that would challenge the very boundaries of science and nature. Outside, the storm that had been brewing finally broke, rain lashing against the barn as if nature itself was trying to wash away the evidence of what had transpired. But some changes, once set in motion, can never be undone. And in the hills beyond Charleston, a new legend was about to be born. The days following Star and her foal's mysterious disappearance were a whirlwind of activity. Colonel Blackwood and his team combed every inch of the Williams farm and the surrounding countryside, but found no trace of the extraordinary creatures. Sarah, Thomas, and Dr. Harris were subjected to endless questioning, their lives turned upside down by the military presence. As the initial frenzy died down, an uneasy calm settled over Charleston. The townspeople, sensing something amiss but kept in the dark about the true nature of events, whispered and speculated. Sarah found herself at the center of it all, struggling to maintain a sense of normalcy while grappling with the weight of what she'd witnessed. One crisp autumn morning, about a week after the incident, Sarah sat on her porch, clutching a mug of tea and staring out at the misty fields. The sound of approaching footsteps made her turn, and she saw young Sarah Anderson making her way up the path. "Mrs. Williams," the girl said hesitantly, "can we talk?" Sarah nodded, gesturing for her to sit. "What's on your mind, honey?" The younger Sarah twisted her hands in her lap. I've been having these dreams about Star and the foal. They feel so real, like they're trying to tell me something." Sarah's heart raced. "So what kind of dreams?" "I see them running through a forest I've never seen before. There are lights dancing around them, and I can hear music. But it's like no music I've ever heard." The girl's eyes were wide with wonder and confusion. "And sometimes I wake up feeling like Star is right there in the room with me." Sarah leaned forward, her voice low. "Have you told anyone else about this?" The girl shook her head. "I was afraid they'd think I was crazy. But I thought, maybe you'd understand." Before Sarah could respond, a commotion from the nearby road caught their attention. A sleek black car had pulled up, and out stepped a woman in a sharp suit, her red hair gleaming in the morning sun. "Mrs. Williams," the woman called out, striding purposefully towards the porch. "I'm Dr. Elena Rossi from the National Science Foundation. I was hoping we could talk." Sarah exchanged a quick glance with young Sarah. "Why don't you head on home, dear? We'll talk more later." As the girl left, Dr. Rossi took her place on the porch. "Mrs. Williams, I'll be direct. I'm here about the incidents involving your mare, Star." Sarah's guard went up immediately. "I've already told the military everything I know." Dr. Rossi smiled, a knowing glint in her eye. "I'm not with the military, Mrs. Williams. In fact, I'm here because I believe there's much more to this story than Colonel Blackwood and his team are willing to consider." She pulled out a tablet, bringing up images that made Sarah's breath catch. They were blurry, taken from a distance, but unmistakable. A horse-like creature with a shimmering coat running through a forest glade, lights dancing around it. "These were taken 3 days ago in the Appalachian Mountains," Dr. Rossi explained. "We believe Star and her foal are evolving, adapting to their environment in ways we never thought possible, and we think they might be trying to communicate." Sarah's mind reeled, thinking of young Sarah's dreams. Communicate? How? Dr. Rossi leaned in, her voice intense. "There have been reports of strange dreams, psychic phenomena, even healings in the areas where these creatures have been sighted. Mrs. Williams, we believe Star and her offspring might be the key to unlocking human potential we've only dreamed of." As if on cue, a warm breeze swept across the porch, carrying with it a faint, ethereal melody. Both women fell silent, listening to the impossible song on the wind. Dr. Rossi's eyes shone with excitement. "Will you help us, Mrs. Williams? Will you help us find them and understand what they've become?" Sarah stood, looking out over her farm, the land that had been in her family for generations, now at the epicenter of something that could change the world forever. She thought of Star, of the intelligence she'd seen in those equine eyes, of the bond they'd shared. "I'll help," Sarah said finally, turning back to Dr. Rossi. "But on one condition, we protect them. Whatever Star and her foal have become, they're not weapons or experiments, they're miracles." Dr. Rossi nodded solemnly. "You have my word." As they shook hands, sealing their agreement, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of an adventure beyond her wildest imagination. Somewhere out there, Star and her foal were waiting, their impossible existence a beacon of hope and wonder in an ever-changing world. The breeze picked up again, and this time, Sarah was sure she heard a familiar whinny carried on the wind, a call to action, a promise of marvels yet to come. As autumn gave way to winter, the hunt for Star and her foal intensified. Sarah found herself at the center of a whirlwind of activity, working closely with Dr. Rossi and her team from the National Science Foundation. They set up a base of operations in an old barn on the Williams farm, transforming it into a high-tech command center. Reports of sightings poured in from across the Appalachian region, glowing figures racing through misty valleys, mysterious healings in small mountain towns, and dreams of otherworldly music shared by people who had never met. Each account brought them closer to unraveling the mystery of what Star and her offspring had become. On a cold December morning, as the first snow of the season dusted the Charleston countryside, Sarah awoke with a start. The familiar presence she'd felt in her mind the day Star disappeared was back, stronger than ever. Without hesitation, she dressed and rushed to the barn. Dr. Rossi and her team were already there, their equipment lighting up with unprecedented readings. "It's happening," Dr. Rossi said, her eyes wide with excitement. "They're coming back." As if in response to her words, a shimmering portal of light appeared in the center of the barn. From it emerged Star, her coat gleaming with an otherworldly iridescence, and beside her the foal, now grown into a magnificent young horse, its body seeming to shift between physical and ethereal forms. Sarah stepped forward, her heart pounding. "Star," she whispered. The mare nickered softly, touching her muzzle to Sarah's outstretched hand. In that moment, Sarah's mind was flooded with images and sensations, vast cosmic landscapes, the interconnectedness of all living things, and a sense of purpose that transcended human understanding. "They've evolved beyond anything we could have imagined," Dr. Rossi breathed, awe evident in her voice. "They're not just horses anymore, they're guardians, bridges between our world and something greater." As the team watched in amazement, Star and her offspring began to glow, their light spreading throughout the barn. Those touched by it felt a surge of energy, their minds expanding to grasp concepts previously beyond human comprehension. Thomas Anderson burst into the barn, his face a mixture of guilt and wonder. "I never meant for this to happen," he said, approaching Star cautiously. "Can you ever forgive me?" Star turned her luminous gaze on him, and Thomas gasped as understanding washed over him. "They don't blame us," he said, tears in his eyes. They see our experiment as the first step in a greater journey, for them and for humanity." Dr. Rossi stepped forward, her scientific curiosity warring with her awe. "What happens now?" she asked. In response, the young horse, Star's offspring, touched its muzzle to Dr. Rossi's forehead. Her eyes widened as knowledge poured into her mind. "They're not staying," she announced, her voice filled with both sadness and excitement. "But they're not leaving us entirely either. They'll be guardians watching over our world, helping us evolve and grow. And sometimes, when we need them most, they'll return." As if to confirm her words, the shimmering portal reappeared. Star and her offspring moved towards it, pausing to look back at the assembled humans. Sarah felt a final touch on her mind, a mixture of love, gratitude, and promise. She understood then that this was not an ending, but a beginning. The miracle born on her small farm in Charleston would ripple out, touching lives across the world, opening minds to new possibilities. "Go," she said softly, tears streaming down her face. "But come back to us someday." With a final whinny that seemed to resonate through time and space, Star and her foal stepped into the portal. In a flash of blinding light, they were gone, leaving behind a barn full of changed humans and a world on the brink of a new era. As the light faded, Sarah looked around at the faces of those who had shared this incredible journey. Dr. Rossi, Thomas, young Sarah, Dr. Harris. She saw in their eyes the same mix of wonder and purpose that she felt in her heart. "Well," she said, a smile breaking through her tears, "I guess we have work to do." Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing the world in white, a clean slate for the new chapter that was about to unfold. In barns and laboratories, in towns and cities across the globe, a new understanding was dawning. The story of Star and her miraculous foal was just the beginning, a herald of the marvels and challenges that lay ahead as humanity took its next steps into a future filled with possibilities beyond their wildest dreams. As Sarah stepped out into the snowy morning, she felt a warm breeze, impossible for the season, brush against her cheek, and in that breeze, she could have sworn she heard the distant echo of a familiar whinny, a promise of wonders yet to come.